The symbol was scratched into the mill's doorframe, a circle with 2 arrows, a hobo's warning meaning danger here. But inside, under the warped floorboards, the farmer found something the code never mentioned: an 8-year-old girl and her baby brother, hiding not from the law, but from the man who drew that mark. This was Kansas, 1934, the height of the Great Depression, when desperate men rode the rails and left silent warnings for each other in chalk. But the girl hiding in that mill wasn't a hobo. She was 8 years old, guarding a secret that would force one stoic farmer to ask, was that symbol on the door a warning for transients to stay out, or a target marking the children he just found inside? The farmer's name was Eli Vance. He owned 40 acres of dust-choked wheatland that hadn't yielded a proper harvest in 3 seasons, and he came to the old Hatcher mill looking for scrap lumber to patch his barn roof. He wasn't looking for a crisis, but the moment he lifted that floorboard and saw the girl's terrified face, the crisis found him. She didn't scream. That was the first thing he noticed. Her eyes went wide as dinner plates, one hand clamping over the sleeping infant's mouth, the other pressing a single grimy finger to her own lips, a gesture of pure practiced silence. Eli froze, one knee on the dusty plank, the gray Kansas light filtering through the broken slats above. He'd heard rumors of families holing up in abandoned places, Hoovervilles they called the shantytowns by the railroads, but this wasn't a family. This was a child guarding a baby. "Easy now," he said, his voice low, the way he'd use with a spooked horse. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The girl just stared, her chest hitching with shallow breaths. The baby, a boy maybe 4 months old, slept on wrapped in a man's threadbare flannel shirt. The floorboard cavity was lined with old burlap sacks. A tin cup with a sip of water sat in the corner. They'd been here a while. Eli slowly sat back on his heels, showing his empty hands. "My name's Eli. I farm the land just west of here. You been here long?" A minute passed. A dust mote drifted through the sunbeam between them. Finally, her voice came out as a dry rasp. 3 days. "Where's your mama, your daddy?" She shook her head once, a sharp, definitive movement. Her eyes darted toward the mill's main door. Eli followed her look. The symbol, the circle with 2 arrows, it wasn't chalk, he realized now. It was scratched deep into the wood grain with something sharp, a permanent mark, a brand. "He marked the place," the girl whispered. "That means he's coming back." A cold knot tightened in Eli's gut. Who marked it? Who's coming back? She wouldn't say the name, but her story came out in fractured pieces over the next hour as Eli shared his canteen water and a piece of hardtack from his pocket. Her name was Leela. The baby was her brother, Samuel. They were from a town 2 counties over. Their mother had gotten sick in the spring, a dust pneumonia she called it, and never got up again. Their father, a railroad man, had stopped sending money months before that. They were living in a borrowed shed when the man with the sharp knife came. "He was a writer," Leela said, her arms locked tight around Samuel. "He said Papa owed. He said we were the payment until the debt was clear. Mama told me to run, so I ran. I took Sam and I ran." She'd hopped a slow-moving freight train, clutching her brother, and jumped off when she saw the mill's water tower. She knew the hobo signs from watching the men who sometimes came to their door begging for work. The circle with arrows was the worst one. It meant danger here or get out fast. But she was out of food and Sam was crying and the mill was empty. So she used it. She figured if the place was marked as dangerous, maybe the writer wouldn't look inside. It was the logic of a starving 8-year-old, brilliant and terrifying. Eli knew he couldn't leave them. The law in Cutter County was a tired, overworked sheriff named Briggs who spent more time chasing relief office paperwork than real outlaws. The county home was overflowing, and the stories that came out of it about older kids bullying the young ones turned Eli's stomach. He made a decision right there in the dust. "You come with me," he said. "To my farm, it's quiet, we'll figure this out." He expected relief. Instead, pure panic flashed across Leela's face. "No, he finds his marks. He always finds them. If we leave, he'll know someone took us. He'll come looking." Then we don't tell anyone, Eli said, the plan forming as he spoke. You two stay hidden in my house. I've got a root cellar, good and dark. We wait. We see if anyone comes nosing around the mill. If they do, we'll know. It was a risk, harboring strangers, kids no less, without reporting it. But Eli Vance was a man acquainted with silent burdens. He'd lost his own wife to the influenza in '28, and the farm had become a tomb of quiet memories. Maybe, he thought, this was a reason to fill the silence with something other than wind. He got them home under a tarp in the bed of his truck, just as the last light bled from the sky. He settled them in the root cellar with blankets, a lantern, and a pot of thin stew. Leela finally slept, Samuel curled against her. The next morning, Eli went into town. Cutler's Bend was a skeleton of its former self, boarded up storefronts, a line of men outside the WPA office. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed information. He went to the general store, run by a sharp-eyed woman named Martha Hollins. He bought nails and flour, making casual talk about the weather. Then, as Martha counted his change, he asked, as if it were an afterthought, "Heard there's been some rough types riding through. Collectors, maybe. One who marks places with a knife." Martha's hand froze over the cash drawer. She didn't look up. "You seen a mark?" "Maybe, over at the old Hatcher place." She pushed his change across the counter, her voice dropping. "Then you ain't seen nothing, Eli Vance. You forget you saw it. Men who leave those marks don't take kindly to questions, and they settle debts in ways the sheriff don't put in his reports." "Who is he?" Eli pressed. Her eyes finally met his, hard with warning. "They call him Silas Rourke. Used to be a railroad bull, a real brutal one. Now he's a freelance collector for anyone who wants a debt squeezed out of a man. He's got an understanding with certain people in this county. He doesn't get bothered, and in return," she trailed off, glancing toward the sheriff's office down the street, "well, he keeps the real desperate element in line. You understanding me?" Eli understood. Silas Rourke was a sanctioned predator. The symbol wasn't just a warning to hobos. It was a claim tag. And by taking Leela and Samuel, Eli had just stolen another man's property. He drove home, his mind racing. He could still go to Briggs, but Martha's fearful eyes told him how that would go. The law here was flexible, bent to accommodate useful monsters. He was on his own. For 3 days, a tense routine held. Leela and Samuel stayed hidden in the cellar during the day. Eli brought them food, and Leela told him fragments of her old life. Her father's name was Joe. He worked for the Missouri Pacific Line. He liked to whistle. She didn't know who he owed money to or how much, just that Silas Rourke had come collecting. On the 4th evening, as Eli was finishing the barn repairs, he saw a dust plume on the western road. A single motorcycle, not a car or truck. It moved fast, kicking up a dry cloud. It slowed as it passed his fence line. The rider, a lean man in a leather jacket, his face shaded by goggles, turned his head. He looked right at Eli's farmhouse. He looked for a full 5 seconds. Then he gunned the engine and sped toward town. Eli's blood went cold. It was a scout. A man on a motorcycle could cover ground, ask quiet questions, look for signs. He hurried to the root cellar. "We might have trouble," he told Leela. "A rider just passed by, looking." Leela's face went bone white. She clutched Samuel closer. "It's him or one of his." "We don't know that," Eli said, but the fear was contagious. That night, Eli slept with his loaded shotgun by the bed. He heard every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind in the dry cornstalks. Just before dawn, he heard a new sound, the slow, deliberate crunch of gravel under a boot, close to the house. He was at the window in seconds, peering through the crack in the curtain. The first pink light of morning silhouetted a man standing at the edge of Eli's porch. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at the ground, at the path to the root cellar's outside hatch. Then the man knelt down, and Eli saw the glint of a knife in his hand. He wasn't breaking in. He was leaving a message. He was scratching a symbol into the hard-packed dirt of Eli Vance's homestead. The circle, the 2 arrows. The mark was no longer on a distant mill door. It was on his home. The claim had been transferred. Silas Rourke knew. Eli didn't wait for the man to finish the mark. He stepped onto the porch, the shotgun held low at his side, and said the one thing you never say to a predator: "I see you." The man at the base of the steps froze, his knife poised over the dirt. He wasn't Silas Rourke. He was younger, wiry, with a nervous energy that didn't match the reputation. Eli recognized him as the motorcycle scout from the day before. The man's eyes flicked from Eli's face to the shotgun and back. He stood up slowly, wiping the blade on his trousers. "Just leaving a message for Mr. Rourke," the man said, his voice trying for casual and missing by a mile. "He's looking for something that belongs to him. He thinks it might have wandered onto your land." "I don't have anything that belongs to Silas Rourke," Eli said, his voice flat. "You can tell him that." "See, that's the thing," the scout said, taking a careful step backward. "Mr. Rourke doesn't rely on tellings, he relies on seeings, and he'll be by to see for himself directly, probably tomorrow." He tipped an imaginary hat. "You have a good morning now." The man turned and walked briskly back to his motorcycle parked on the roadside. Eli watched him go, the shotgun growing heavy in his hand. Tomorrow. He had one day. He went straight to the root cellar. Leela was already awake, Samuel fussing in her arms. She'd heard the voices. "He's coming, isn't he?" she asked, her voice small. "He's sending someone," Eli corrected, though the distinction felt hollow. "We need to move you, somewhere he wouldn't think to look." But where? The farm was isolated. The neighbors were a mile down the road, and Eli knew old man Peterson would ask questions he couldn't answer. The town was out of the question. Then he remembered the ice house. It was a small, stone-built storage dug into a north-facing hill, unused since his wife passed. It was cold, dark, and most importantly, not on any property map. He'd have to risk moving them in daylight. He bundled Leela and Samuel into the truck under a canvas again, but this time he drove east, away from town, taking a circuitous route through fallow fields before doubling back to the ice house. He settled them inside with blankets, a lantern, and a stern warning not to make a sound or light the lamp until full dark. Then he did the thing he'd been avoiding. He went to see Sheriff Amos Briggs. Briggs's office was a closet of a room in the town hall, smelling of stale coffee and defeat. The sheriff was a man in his 50s who looked like he'd been stuffed into his uniform a decade ago and had been slowly deflating ever since. He listened to Eli's edited story, a story about finding two stray children hiding in an abandoned mill, children who were terrified of a man named Silas Rourke, without looking up from his desk blotter. When Eli finished, Briggs sighed, a long, tired sound. "Eli, I know you mean well, but Silas Rourke is a businessman. He recovers assets for creditors. It's a legal trade. He's using a knife to mark properties and threatening children. That ain't legal." Briggs finally met his eyes. "Can you prove that? Can you prove he threatened anyone? Or is this just the story of a scared little girl who probably ran away from a county home?" "She's not lying." "Maybe not, but her father, Joe Halsey, is a known drunkard and debtor. He skipped town on the Missouri Pacific Line 6 months ago, leaving debts all over 2 counties. Rourke has a legitimate claim to recover what's owed, if that includes securing the man's children as wards until the debt is settled." Briggs spread his hands. "It's a gray area, Eli, and in gray areas I follow the paperwork. Rourke has paperwork." Eli felt the ground shifting under him. "You're saying you'd hand 2 children over to that man because of a debt?" "I'm saying the law is complicated," Briggs said, his voice dropping. "And I'm saying that Silas Rourke has an understanding with certain people in this county, people who sign my paycheck. He keeps the real troublemakers, the hobos who steal, the union agitators in line. In return, he gets to operate. It's a balance. You bringing me these children upsets that balance." There it was, the institutional truth. Rourke wasn't an outlaw. He was an unofficial arm of the law, a terror given a badge of silence. Eli knew then that he wouldn't get help from this office. He stood to leave. Eli, Briggs said as he reached the door. A word of advice. If you have seen those children, the best thing you can do is bring them to me. Let me handle it through the proper channels. If Rourke finds them on your property first, what he does won't be my jurisdiction. It'll be between you and him, and you will lose. The warning was clear. The law would look the other way. Eli left town not with fear, but with a cold, clarifying anger. He needed leverage. He needed to know what he was really fighting. He drove to the public library, a single room above the post office, and asked the elderly librarian for back issues of newspapers from Missouri, from the town Leela had named. It took an hour of dust-choked searching, but he found it, a small article from 8 months prior. Local rail worker sought for questioning. The worker was Joseph Halsey. The crime wasn't debt, it was theft. He was suspected of stealing payroll from the Missouri Pacific Line, a sum of over $2,000, after a routine transport was ambushed. The article said Halsey had disappeared along with his family. The railroad detectives were investigating. There was no mention of Silas Rourke. But Eli connected the dots. The railroad wouldn't hire a thug to find a thief. They'd hire a detective or the police, unless they wanted the money back quietly, without questions, without a trial that might expose their own security failures. They'd hire a man like Rourke, a man who could operate in the gray areas Sheriff Briggs loved so much. The debt wasn't to a loan shark, it was to a railroad corporation. And the payment wasn't just the children, it was the missing money. Leela and Samuel were bait, or leverage, or collateral. He rushed back to the ice house as dusk fell. Leela was feeding Samuel mashed beans from a tin with her finger. Eli sat down across from her, holding the fragile newspaper clipping. "Leela," he said gently, "you said your papa owed money. Did he ever have a lot of money, all at once?" Her face closed off, her shoulders hunching. She shook her head, but her eyes told a different story. She knew something. "I'm not mad," Eli said. "I just need to know what Rourke is really after. It's not just you. It's something else, isn't it?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Papa came home one night with a satchel," she whispered, so low Eli had to lean in. "He was scared. He said it was a blessing and a curse. He said it was for us, for a new start, away from the dust. He hid it. Then the men came. The railroad men first, then the man with the knife." She looked at Eli, her guilt overwhelming. "Mama told me where he hid it, in the mill, under the floor, in a different spot than where we slept. She said if anything happened to them, it was for Sam and me, for our future." Eli's mind raced back to the Hatcher mill. He'd only lifted one floorboard. The place was a maze of them. "Do you know which spot?" She nodded. "I can show you." It was a reckless move. Rourke was watching the farm, and the mill was the first place he'd look. But it was also the last place he'd expect Eli to return to. And $2,000 was a fortune. It was power. It was a way to buy a new identity, to disappear the children for good. It was also proof. Proof that could maybe, just maybe, turn the railroad against Rourke and make the sheriff act. They waited until full dark. Eli left Samuel with a trusted neighbor woman, telling her it was a sick relative's child, for just one night. He and Leela rode back to the mill on his truck, lights off, bouncing across the fields to avoid the roads. The mill was darker and more ominous at night. The symbol on the door seemed to pulse in the moonlight. Eli carried his shotgun and a shovel. Leila, gripping his hand, led him unerringly to a far corner of the main floor, to a plank that looked no different from any other. "Here," she said. Eli pried it up. The space below was empty except for dirt and mouse droppings. His heart sank. Then Leela reached in, her small fingers probing the side of a supporting beam. She found a loose knot in the wood, twisted it, and a small, hidden compartment swung open. Inside was a leather satchel, thick with dust. Eli lifted it out. It was heavy. He untied the straps. It wasn't full of cash. It was full of railroad bonds and company scrip, along with a smaller bundle of real currency. It was untraceable corporate money, the stolen payroll. At that moment, headlights swept across the mill's exterior, lighting up the dusty windows. A car engine grumbled to a stop outside. Doors opened and closed. Heavy boots crunched on gravel. A voice, low and gravelly, called out, "I know you're in there, Vance. You have something of mine, and you have my property. Come on out and we can discuss terms." Silas Rourke had come a day early. Eli shoved the satchel back into the hiding place and motioned for Leela to get into the floor cavity. He replaced the plank over her, his heart hammering. He had no plan, only a shotgun and the desperate knowledge that the money was his only bargaining chip. He stood up, stepped into the center of the moonlit floor, and faced the door. "I'm alone," he called out, lying smoothly. "The children aren't here." The door swung open. Silas Rourke filled the doorway. He was taller than Eli expected, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old saddle leather. He wore a long coat and a calm, empty smile. Two other men flanked him, the motorcycle scout and a larger, silent brute. "Now why would I believe that, farmer?" Rourke asked, stepping inside. His eyes scanned the shadows, missing nothing. "A man doesn't come back to the scene of the crime for no reason. You're looking for the same thing I am." "I don't know what you're talking about." "The Halsey debt," Rourke said, taking another step. $2,200. The railroad wants it back. I get a percentage. I also get the children as a lesson to other employees about the cost of betrayal. It's a simple equation. You give me the money and the kids, you walk away. You do," he shrugged. "Well, you've seen my calling card. You know how I handle bad debts." Eli raised the shotgun, leveling it at Rourke's chest. "I'm not giving you children." Rourke didn't flinch. He actually chuckled. "That's a one-shot solution, Vance. And then my associates here will make sure you don't get a second, and then we'll find the girl and the baby anyway. Think. Be logical." The brute shifted, his hand moving toward his waistband. The scout licked his lips, nervous. "The money's gone," Eli bluffed. "Halsey must have spent it." Rourke's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "I don't think so. I think it's here, and I think you know where." He looked directly at the floorboard where Leela was hidden. "In fact, I'd wager it's right under our feet." He took another step forward, now within 10 feet of Eli. The shotgun felt suddenly useless. If he fired, he'd be dead a second later, and Leela would be found. "Last chance, farmer," Rourke said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Where is my money?" From beneath the floorboards, directly under Rourke's boots, came a sound. A tiny, hiccuping cough. Samuel's cough. Leela had smuggled the baby with her, hidden under her coat. Rourke's eyes dropped to the floor, his smile turning triumphant. "Well," he said softly, "that simplifies things." In the dead silence that followed the baby's cough, Silas Rourke didn't order his men to attack. He simply smiled, reached into his coat, and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Amos Briggs sends his regards," he said. "You're under arrest for kidnapping Eli Vance." The world tilted. Eli kept the shotgun raised, but the ground had fallen out from under him. Kidnapping. Two children, Joseph Halsey's lawful offspring, were reported missing from lawful protective custody, Rourke recited, taking a slow step forward. "I'm a duly authorized agent of the Missouri Pacific Railroad Security Division, tasked with their recovery. You have been found harboring them. That's a federal charge, given the interstate nature of the theft. Now you can drop that scattergun and come quietly, or my associates, and I will be forced to subdue you and add resisting arrest. Either way, I'm taking the children and the money." It was a perfect legal trap. Briggs had provided the cover. Rourke had the paperwork. Eli was the outlaw now. The brute moved, fast for his size, and before Eli could swing the barrel, a pistol was pressed against his temple. "Drop it," the man grunted. Eli let the shotgun clatter to the floor. The scout scrambled to grab it. Rourke stepped forward and snapped the cuffs on Eli's wrists with practiced efficiency. "Now," Rourke said, turning his attention to the floorboard, "let's not keep the little ones in the dark." He nodded to the brute. "Get them out." The floorboard was ripped up. Leela was crouched there, Samuel clutched to her chest, her face a mask of pure terror. The brute hauled her out roughly. Samuel began to wail. "Leave them alone," Eli roared, straining against the cuffs. Rourke ignored him, kneeling to peer into the cavity. "The money, girl, where is it?" Leela shook her head, tears streaming. Rourke sighed, standing up. He walked over to Eli. "You have a simple choice, Vance. You tell me where the satchel is and I deliver these children to the county orphanage. It's not pleasant, but they'll be alive. You refuse," he glanced at Leela. "My contract is for the recovery of assets. The railroad wants its money back. The children are secondary, a liability even. I can recover one without the other." The threat hung in the dusty air. He was saying he would kill them. "Under the northeast beam," Eli said, the words ash in his mouth. "There's a compartment." The scout scurried to the spot, found the hidden latch and pulled out the leather satchel. He brought it to Rourke, who opened it, thumbed through the bonds and scrip, and nodded in satisfaction. "Good," Rourke said. He looked at Eli with something almost like pity. "You're a decent man. Decent men lose." He turned to his men. "Take him to the car. We'll drop him with Briggs on the way out of town." Eli was shoved toward the door. He looked back at Leela, held firmly by the brute. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. Her eyes were huge, lost. They put Eli in the back of a black sedan, the scout driving, the brute in the passenger seat with the satchel. Rourke followed on his motorcycle, presumably with Leela and Samuel. They didn't go toward town. They drove west into deeper darkness. "Briggs's office is the other way," Eli said from the backseat. The scout glanced at him in the rearview mirror but said nothing. After 20 minutes, they turned down a rutted track that led to a derelict farmstead, a collapsed house and a leaning barn. This wasn't an arrest. This was an execution. Panic shot through Eli. They stopped by the barn. The scout and the brute got out, pulling Eli from the car. Rourke's motorcycle pulled in a moment later, but he was alone. No Leela, no Samuel. "Where are they?" Eli demanded. "With a colleague," Rourke said, dismounting. "Safe for now. Their fate depends on your cooperation with Part 2. "Part 2? Rourke lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating his cold eyes. "The railroad has its money back. My primary contract is fulfilled, but I have a secondary client. One who doesn't care about the money. One who only cares about Joseph Halsey." Eli was lost. "Halsey's gone." "Is he?" Rourke asked. "See, that's the question. The railroad thinks he stole the payroll and ran. My other client thinks he was set up. They think he was a fall guy for a bigger embezzlement scheme within the Missouri Pacific, and that he's hiding, waiting to trade what he knows for his life. They think he'll come back for his children. And you, Mr. Vance, are going to help me flush him out." The conspiracy deepened, growing darker and more tangled. This wasn't just about debt collection. It was a corporate cover-up, and Halsey was a loose end. His children were the bait. "What do you want me to do?" Eli asked, his mind racing. "You're going to become a community hero," Rourke said, smiling. "Tomorrow you'll be found wandering near your truck, which will be crashed in a ditch. You'll have a concussion, a story about being jumped by hobos. You'll tell Sheriff Briggs and the whole town that you rescued 2 poor orphans from the mill, but that the vile vagrants who were squatting there attacked you and stole the children away. You'll be devastated. The town will be outraged. A posse might even form." Eli saw the plan. "You want everyone looking for imaginary hobos, while I use the children to draw out the real target," Rourke finished. "If Halsey is out there, he'll hear his kids are in danger from railroad detectives. He might run, but if he hears they were kidnapped by random tramps, that the law is useless, that's the kind of story that might make a desperate father come home guns blazing, right into my lap." It was brilliant and cruel. Eli would be the puppet, spreading the lie that would orchestrate his own tragedy. "And if I don't?" Eli asked. Rourke dropped his cigarette, grinding it under his heel. "Then the children disappear forever tonight, and you are found dead in this barn, shot with your own shotgun after a tragic struggle with those same imaginary hobos. Briggs will write it up, shake his head, and close the case. So, Do you want to live as a liar or die as a stubborn fool? The choice was no choice at all. To save Leela and Samuel, he had to condemn their father and perpetuate the lie that put them in danger. He had to trust that Rourke would keep them alive as bait and hope for a miracle. "I'll do it," Eli whispered. "Smart," Rourke said. He nodded to the brute. "Make it convincing." The last thing Eli saw was the brute's fist coming at his face. Then darkness. He woke to pain and blinding sunlight. He was lying in a dry ditch, his head throbbing. His truck was crumpled against a fence post 20 yards away, steam rising from the radiator. He was alone. The handcuffs were gone. His wallet was still in his pocket. The stage had been set. Staggering, he made his way to the main road and began the long, painful walk toward Cutter's Bend. It was midday by the time he stumbled into the town. Blood dried on his temple, his clothes torn. People stopped to stare. He went straight to Briggs's office and collapsed into a chair, spinning the lie Rourke had given him. He poured every ounce of genuine fear and desperation into the performance. The hobos, the attack, the children stolen from him. Briggs listened, his expression unreadable. When Eli finished, the sheriff stood up. "You're sure they were taken, not just lost?" "They were taken," Eli insisted, holding the sheriff's gaze, praying Briggs couldn't see the truth screaming behind his eyes. Briggs was silent for a long moment. Then he called in his deputy. "Round up a few men. We'll start searching the rail camps east of town." As the deputy left, Briggs turned back to Eli. "You should see Doc about that head. I'll need a formal statement later." Eli left, the taste of the lie bitter in his mouth. The news spread through Cutter's Bend like a prairie fire. By evening, a sense of righteous outrage had taken hold. A group of men, led by Tom Aldridge, a rancher who'd had his own troubles with vagrants, came to Eli's farm. "We're forming a watch," Aldridge said, his jaw set. "We'll patrol the rail lines, search every camp. We'll find those kids, Eli." Eli wanted to scream at them to stop, that every step they took was playing into Rourke's hands, driving the real threat deeper into shadow. But he could only nod, playing the grateful, grieving rescuer. That night, as the amateur posse gathered with torches and rifles, Eli slipped away from his own farm. He had one desperate card left to play. Martha Hollins at the general store. She'd been afraid, but she'd warned him. She knew things. He went to the back of her store, tapping on her kitchen window. She opened it, her face wary in the lamplight. "I need your help," Eli said, his voice raw. "Not as the sheriff, as someone who knows how things really work here." She let him in. He told her everything, the full truth. The money, Rourke's dual clients, the setup, the children being used as bait. To his surprise, she didn't seem shocked. "Rourke's been the sharp end of a stick for a long time," she said quietly, pouring him a cup of bitter coffee. "The railroad, the land banks, they use him for messy work. But what you're describing, using children to smoke out a man who might expose an embezzlement scheme, that's not just messy. That's combustion. It could burn down more than just Joe Halsey." "Do you know where he might keep them?" Eli asked. She thought, stirring her own coffee. "There's an old switching station on the abandoned spur line 10 miles north. It's technically railroad property. Rourke uses it sometimes. Sheriff Briggs knows not to go poking around up there." She met his eyes. "If you go alone, and you don't come back if you find what you're looking for. You take those children and you run. You understand? This town, this county, it can't help you. The rot goes too deep." It was the confirmation he needed, and a death sentence for any hope of a lawful resolution. The system wasn't just compromised, it was an active participant. Eli left Martha's with a whispered thanks. He went home, gathered what little cash he had, his father's old revolver, and a map. He was about to light out for the switching station when he saw a shadow detach itself from his porch. It was Tom Aldridge. The rancher had a rifle slung over his shoulder and a look of grim determination. "The boys are searching the south line," Aldridge said. "I got to thinking, A hobo wouldn't take a baby, too much trouble, and they wouldn't have knocked you out and just left your wallet. He stepped closer, his eyes hard. You're lying, Eli, and I want to know why. Eli was too tired, too desperate to dissemble anymore. In a low voice, he told Aldridge the truth. Aldridge listened, his face growing stormy. When Eli finished, the rancher spat into the dust. "Briggs," he muttered, "I knew he was weak. I didn't know he was wicked." He looked at Eli's packed bag and revolver. "You're going after them." "I am." "You'll die alone." "Then I'll die." Aldridge was silent for a long minute, staring out at the dark prairie. "My brother lost everything to the land bank," he said finally. "They had a man like Rourke persuade him to sign. I stood by and did nothing because I was scared." He looked back at Eli, a new resolve in his eyes. "I ain't standing by this time. I'm coming with you." 2 men against Rourke's crew was a suicide mission. But Eli and Aldridge had one advantage. The posse of angry townsfolk searching the rail lines was the perfect distraction. As the county looked south, they rode north into the heart of the trap. The abandoned switching station was a cluster of rotting wooden buildings and rusted tracks being reclaimed by prairie grass. A single lantern glowed in the window of the foreman's shack. Eli and Aldridge left their horses a half-mile out and approached on foot under a moonless sky. From the edge of the tree line they watched. The motorcycle scout sat on the shack's porch, smoking. The brute was visible through the window, packing. There was no sign of Rourke, Leela, or Samuel. "We need to draw one out," Aldridge whispered, his rifle already settled against his shoulder. "Split their strength." Eli nodded. He picked up a stone and threw it in a high arc. It clattered against the metal carcass of a switching lever 30 yards from the porch. The scout jumped up, pistol drawn, peering into the dark. "Who's there?" "Silence." "Probably a coon." The brute called from inside, but he came to the door anyway. The scout, nervous, stepped off the porch to investigate. Aldridge's rifle cracked once, a flat, sharp report. The scout dropped, clutching his leg, screaming. The brute ducked back inside, blowing out the lantern. The shack went dark. Now it was 2 against 1, but the brute had the high ground and the hostages, and they still didn't know where Rourke was. "You cover the front," Eli said. "I'm going around back." He circled wide, his father's revolver heavy in his hand. The shack had a rear door, warped and sagging on its hinges. He could hear the brute moving inside and the faint sound of a child crying. "Samuel." Eli took a deep breath and kicked the door. The old wood splintered and he burst into the dark room. He saw the brute's silhouette against the far window, turning, raising a gun. Eli fired first. The revolver bucked in his hand, the flash blinding. The brute grunted and stumbled back, crashing into a table. A match flared in the corner. Silas Rourke sat in a chair, a kerosene lamp at his feet. He held the match to the wick and soft light filled the room. Leela and Samuel were huddled in a corner behind him, tied together. Rourke had a pistol resting on his knee, pointed at the children. "Right on time," Rourke said calmly, as if welcoming guests. He nudged the brute with his boot. The man groaned, clutching his shoulder. "You've incapacitated my help, but the equation hasn't changed." Aldridge appeared in the front doorway, rifle leveled. "Let them go, Rourke." "Or what? You'll shoot me and risk a bullet hitting the children in this confined space," Rourke smiled. "I think not. We're at a stalemate, but I have a proposition." "We're not dealing with you," Eli snarled. "You will," Rourke said, his eyes glittering in the lamplight. "Because I'm going to give you what you want, the children, in exchange for the one thing my secondary client wants, Joseph Halsey." "He's not here," Eli said. "But he will be," Rourke said. "You see, I sent a telegram this afternoon to a post office box in Omaha that Halsey has used before. I told him his children would be on the westbound freight leaving Cutter's Bend at dawn in a locked boxcar. If he wants them, he has to show himself and board that train. All you have to do is take the children to that boxcar and wait. When Halsey appears, you walk away. I get my man, you get your conscience clear. It was another layered trap. Halsey would be walking into an ambush, and Eli would be the bait setter. And if we refuse, Aldridge asked. Then I shoot the girl first, then the baby, then we have our gunfight, Rourke said, his tone conversational. You might kill me, but they'll definitely be dead. Your choice. Eli looked at Leela. Her eyes were locked on his, pleading. He had brought this violence to her. He had to end it. We do it, Eli said. Aldridge shot him a furious look, but Eli gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A plan was forming, reckless and thin. Good, Rourke said. He stood, keeping his pistol on the children. Untie them, you have until dawn. The westbound freight slows for water at the tower 2 miles west of town. Boxcar number 7814 will be open. You put them inside, you wait. When Halsey appears, you leave. Do not interfere. Eli moved forward, cutting the ropes binding Leela and Samuel with his knife. He gathered them up, Samuel wailing, Leela trembling violently. Remember, Rourke said as they backed out of the shack, any deviation and I have men on that train who will rectify the situation, permanently. They retreated into the night, carrying the children, leaving Rourke and his wounded man in the shack. Have you lost your mind? Aldridge hissed as they reached the horses. We're delivering them right back to him. We're not, Eli said, lifting Leela onto his horse. We're going to the train, but we're not waiting for Halsey. We're getting on it with them. It was the only move left. They couldn't stay in Cutter's Bend. The corruption was too deep. They had to run, and the westbound freight was their ticket out. They rode hard for the water tower, arriving an hour before dawn. The tracks were silent. Boxcar 7814 stood with its door slightly ajar, a dark, gaping mouth. It was a perfect prison cell on wheels. Eli didn't put the children inside. He, Aldridge, Leela, and Samuel huddled in the brush 50 yards away, watching. As the first pink light touched the horizon, they heard the distant rumble of the approaching train. This was the moment of truth. Would Halsey appear, or would Rourke's men simply take the empty boxcar and come hunting? The train chugged into view, slowing for the water stop. Just as the locomotive passed, a figure emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the tracks. A lean, ragged man with a desperate face. Joseph Halsey. He ran for the open boxcar, pulling himself inside just as the train began to pick up speed. He was alone. Rourke was nowhere to be seen. Now, Eli said. They broke from cover, sprinting for the moving train. Aldridge reached a boxcar 3 behind Halsey's, throwing Leila and Samuel inside before hauling himself up. Eli caught the ladder of the next car, his boots scrambling on the iron rungs. As he pulled himself onto the roof, he looked back. Silas Rourke stepped out from behind the water tower, a rifle in his hands. He wasn't aiming at the train. He was aiming at the fleeing figure of Tom Aldridge, who was turning to help Eli. "Tom down," Eli yelled. The rifle shot echoed. Aldridge jerked and fell backward into the boxcar. Eli's world narrowed to a pinpoint of rage. He raised his revolver from the rocking roof, aimed at the shrinking figure of Rourke, and fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dust at the man's feet. Rourke didn't flinch. He simply lowered his rifle and watched the train disappear, a faint smile on his face. Eli scrambled across the roof and dropped into the boxcar where Aldridge lay. The rancher was hit high in the chest, breathing in wet, ragged gasps. Leela was already using her own dress to try to staunch the blood. "It's bad," Aldridge gritted out. "Leave me at the next stop. Get them clear." "We're not leaving you," Eli said, applying pressure to the wound. The train rumbled west, carrying a wounded man, 2 children, and a fugitive father in a separate car, all fleeing the same evil. They had escaped, but they were not safe. 2 days later, in a charity hospital in Colorado, Tom Aldridge clung to life. Eli had used the last of his cash to get him admitted. Leela and Samuel were with him, quiet and shell-shocked. Eli knew Rourke wouldn't stop. The railroad's money was safe, but Halsey was a loose end, and now Eli was too. He made a decision. He found a telegraph office and sent a message, not to the law but to the Kansas City Star. He told the entire story: the stolen bonds, the embezzlement cover-up, Rourke's sanctioned terror, Sheriff Briggs's complicity. He named names. He included the number of the boxcar and the bond's serial numbers he'd memorized. He sent it to the newspaper's investigative desk. Then he waited. The story broke a week later. "Railroad thug uses children as bait in cover-up," the headline screamed. It caused a scandal. The Missouri Pacific, facing public outrage and federal inquiry, immediately disavowed Silas Rourke, calling him a rogue operative. They quietly settled with Joseph Halsey, offering him immunity in exchange for his testimony about the internal embezzlement ring. The real thieves were higher-ups in the company. Sheriff Briggs was investigated and resigned in disgrace. The system, when exposed to sunlight, proved less rotten than it seemed in the dark. A month after the story ran, Eli stood on the platform of the Colorado hospital. Aldridge was going to live. Joseph Halsey, a free but broken man, had come to collect his children. He stood before Eli, hat in hand, tears in his eyes. "You saved them," Halsey said. "I can never repay you." "Just be their father," Eli said. "That's repayment enough." He watched as Leela and Samuel, cleaner and healthier now, went to their father. Leela looked back at Eli, her eyes full of a sorrow too deep for 8 years. She ran back and hugged him fiercely, then returned to her father's side without a word. Eli Vance returned to his dust-choked farm in Kansas alone. The notoriety from the newspaper story kept Rourke away. The man had vanished into the underworld, his license to operate revoked by his powerful clients. The farm was quieter than ever. But one afternoon, a car pulled up his drive. It was Tom Aldridge, recovered, with Martha Hollins in the passenger seat. They had news. The county commission, newly elected and eager to clean house, had seized the assets of the corrupt land bank that had been squeezing farmers. Eli's mortgage had been voided. The farm was his, free and clear. "Thought you might want to know," Aldridge said, clapping him on the shoulder. "The balance is shifting." Eli thanked them, and as their car kicked up dust down the road, he felt a strange peace. He had stopped running. He had planted himself and fought, and the ground had held. The final surprise came that spring. A letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single, crisp $100 bill and a note in elegant script. It read, "For services rendered, the account is settled, S.R." Rourke was acknowledging his defeat. The symbol carved into the dirt of Eli's farm had been erased, not by weather but by one decent man's refusal to bend. Eli used the money to buy seed. That fall, for the first time in years, his fields bore a harvest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, he could almost hear the ghost of a child's laughter on the wind, a reminder that some debts are paid not in money, but in courage, and that some hiding places become, in the end, a home. Eli Vance's story faded into the local lore of Cutter's Bend, a tale told sometimes during harvest when the dust storms blew. But the deeper truth of that year, of 1934, was not about one farmer or one enforcer. It was about the silent language of the desperate and who chooses to listen. The Hobo Code was a map of unseen dangers and fleeting kindnesses, written for those who lived outside the official systems. Silas Rourke corrupted that code, turning a warning into a brand. But in doing so, he revealed the frightening truth that the official systems themselves, the law, the corporation, the bank, could be just as predatory, hiding behind paperwork and procedure. Eli Vance, a man who spoke the quiet language of the land and of loss, became the unlikely translator. He saw a symbol of danger and, instead of fleeing, looked beneath it. He found not a threat to himself, but a threat to the most vulnerable, a threat the official world had sanctioned. We remember the Great Depression through numbers, the bread lines, the unemployment rates, the dust bowls. But history is also written in the small, defiant acts of protection that bloomed in the cracks of a broken world. It's written in the floorboards of an abandoned mill, in the stubborn soil of a debt-free farm, and in the choice of a solitary man to stop moving, to plant himself between danger and two children who were not his own. The symbol on the mill door is gone now, the wood weathered or replaced, but the question it posed remains. When we see a warning, do we only see a threat to ourselves? Or do we dare to ask, who is this warning meant to protect and who is it meant to leave exposed? In every era, there are those who write the official rules and those who write the secret codes. And sometimes, the most profound justice is delivered by someone who understands both, but only obeys the one written on the human heart. If you want to uncover more stories where the hidden map of the past collides with an ordinary person's courage, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next tale.